Okay, so here is the back page, okay? And this first one here, okay, I would, if I'm going to turn everything into sine and cosine, okay, the only thing right now that's not sine or cosine is this cosecant. So I'm going to think of this as sine times 1 over sine. Because that's my reciprocal identity. Cosecant is equal to 1 over sine. And now this is going to just equal 1. Okay? Because the signs will cancel, so I'm left with just 1. If you cancel everything out, like we did here, remember your final answer, what's left is 1, not 0. Okay? It's not just going to be negative sine squared. You're not going to say, well, all this goes away. Nope. It's going to equal 1. So just make sure if you cancel things, you're left with 1 and not with 0. Now, 1 minus sine squared, this is equal to cosine squared. And again, that's a manipulation of your Pythagorean identity. So if you have sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1, and I need this to equal 1 minus sine squared, I could subtract this from both sides. So there's the manipulation that I'm using to help us get there. Okay? And sometimes I've had students, usually students make a little page that they write all their identities down on, and they like to write some of the manipulations down as well. So they might write cosine squared as 1 minus sine squared, or sine squared as 1 minus cosine squared. If you want to do that, you can write that with your Pythagorean identities to help you. Okay? All right, this next one, cosine times 1 plus tangent squared. I want you to go ahead and give that one a shot on your own. So pause the video and try it. Okay, this is another one where there are 2 different ways to do this. Okay, the orange way is a little bit easier and a little bit faster. Okay, if you recognize that 1 plus tangent squared is secant squared, that's a Pythagorean identity, you can plug that in right away. Okay, and some of you might have seen that. Others might have thought, well, I have no idea, I'm just going to go the sine and cosine route. That's fine too. Okay, so I showed that one down here. So if you turn tangent squared using your quotient rule into sine squared over cosine squared, that's totally fine. Then you would distribute your cosine, giving you this, because this cosine and one of these cosines in the denominator would cancel. Then you would get a common denominator here, so you're multiplying by cosine over cosine. Then you would use your Pythagorean identity, cosine squared plus sine squared is 1, and then your reciprocal identity to get secant. So either way, you're getting the right answer. So sometimes going to that sine and cosine strategy right from the beginning might make it a little longer. You might have to take your time a little bit more, but that's okay. You're still going to get the right answer. Okay, so that's not a terrible thing to do, right? But sometimes it makes it the longer path. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay, so whatever you feel, whatever you're most comfortable with, that's what you should do. Okay? All right, again, go ahead and try the next one. So pause the video, give it a shot. Okay, for this one, I also showed you 2 different ways to do it, but these are very, very similar. Okay? The red way is if you factored out a secant. Okay, now this doesn't happen very often, but if you have the same trig function in both terms, I can factor that secant out. So I'm left with 1 minus sine squared. Then you're using that Pythagorean manipulation to get that 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared. Okay, and then from there, we would just use our reciprocal function to get down to just a single cosine. Now, if you don't do that, that's okay. If you just see the secants and you're like, I'm going to turn those into cosines, that's fine too. So secant is 1 over cosine in both situations. You already have a common denominator, so it's nice. You don't have to find one. It's given to you. Okay, so again, we are left with 1 minus sine squared, which again, you'd still have to use that Pythagorean manipulation to get to cosine squared. And then again, that gets you down to a single cosine. So again, either way is fine. Okay. I'm just showing you multiple ways to do the problems, but as long as you're getting down to the final answer and it's correct, that's all you have to worry about. Okay? All right, there's 2 on this page. go ahead and try them both. So, pause the video, give them both a shot, see how you do. Okay, so again, I've shown you two different ways for both of these. Okay, and the first one with this red one, okay, if you can recognize that 1 plus cotangent squared is cosecant squared, that's going to save you a lot of steps. However, if you notice, if you go through and you turn everything into sine and cosine, usually you're going to follow the same steps. You're usually going to have to get a common denominator like we did here. You're going to have to use the Pythagorean identity of sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. That stuff that you'll see is going to repeat itself over and over. So if you are using that strategy of turning everything into sine and cosine, then you'll see that the steps are going to get repetitive. You're going to say, oh, I did this last time. Oh, I did this last time. Okay, so it's going to be the same thing you'll see over and over. But for that first one, you should be getting cosecant squared. And then for the second one here, I'm sorry that I didn't write it in a great fashion. I went through the orange first and then thought about it to try to come up with a second way. But first things first is you have to get that negative out with the x. And this is an odd function. Sine is odd, so we bring that negative out front. If that had been cosine, then the negative just goes away. So remember, with cosine, the negative goes away. With sine and tangent, we bring the negative out front. Okay, so then I separated them a little bit here, but it's still just multiplication. This is just sine times cotangent. Then I used the reciprocal identity, quotient identity, and canceled. But then I thought about it, and you don't really need to go through this step of turning it into tangent. I could just use my quotient identity right here. And the signs still cancel, so I'm left with just cosine, and then that's the secant. Okay? All right, one more. And again, this one has more than one way to solve it. Okay, so go ahead, last one, pause the video, give it a shot, see how you did. Okay, so here's the two different methods I could come up with. Okay, the first one is you notice that 1 plus cotangent squared is cosecant squared. That's just a straightforward identity. The second one takes a little manipulation of the Pythagorean identity. So the identity is 1 plus tangent squared is secant squared. Well, if I subtract 1 from both sides of that, I get secant squared minus 1 is equal to tangent squared. So I can substitute that in. Then I turn those into sine and cosine using reciprocal and quotient identities. The sine squareds cancel, and I use that reciprocal identity one more time to get secant squared. Now on the right side, I went through and the first thing I did was turn them into sine and cosine, because I know a lot of students will do that as their first step, so that's what I did. And then I FOILed. Okay, so this is the result of the FOIL. So this would be my first term. This times this, the cosine squareds will cancel, and I'm left with just 1 over sine squared. The outside terms give me this, the inside terms give me this, and then the last terms give me -1. Now I can see I already have a common denominator here, so I combine those together. And then this is a manipulation of the Pythagorean identity. That equals 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, so we're just left with the 1 over cosine squared, and that gives us secant squared anyway. Okay? Now, the best way to get better at this is to practice. Okay? Looking at these problems and just looking at them is not going to make you any better at the process. Okay? And there's only so many out there for you to try, for me to give you. There's only so many problems I can give you. So I would just keep doing these over and over. It's going to really help you. Okay? There is a homework assignment. It's only 4 of them. Page 318, numbers 51 through 54. Okay? And you're just simplifying. Okay? There's only 4 of them. Give it a shot. The answers are online, so you can check yourself to see how you did, and I showed my work. I didn't show more than one method, but I did just show one method of doing all of these, okay? And again, when you come back to the building next week, or online or whatever, when we have class next week, we're just going to keep practicing and practicing this, okay? So the more familiar you get with your identities, and just make sure you follow all your algebra rules, we will get better at this, okay? Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you all soon.